like making it out
Right.
to
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
propaganda in itself. So for me, it's just in good fun. Like there's nothing like horrible about it.
Yeah, no, I get that. I think you got to see the funny side of it. I know, like after a certain time with UK wrestlers, I was just like, we just got used to it. Obviously, of late with guys like Drew McIntyre, obviously, like they've decided to go a different way. But I think the last person was kind of like Wade Barrett got put in that sort of shoe hole as a sort of character, a bit like that. And yeah, it's kind of a fascinating thing. I guess it sort of stems back to the whole, I don't know if you know the film, but like Rocky 4, Ivan Drago, that kind of us versus them mentality, and they're so bad and we're so good. And it's kind of a perception thing that lives on, that WWE like to play into most times. But it's quite fascinating that it aired on mainstream news, that they would show that, because I could just imagine if you're not a wrestling fan and you see this guy coming out on a tank waving
Yeah.
the Russian
And
waving the Russian
that in
flag.
itself is an illustration of like how Russian people don't really grasp the idea of what wrestling is, because
Mhm.
Russians are the bad guys in American movies all of the time. But
Yeah,
can
yeah,
you
yeah, yeah.
imagine like a mainstream news outlet like taking this like extract from a movie and like showing it on the news? No, of course not, because everyone understands that it's fiction and that it's like some sort of like mind games, but it's not that serious. And then there comes wrestling and they're not sure like what is it, like is it a sport, is it some sort of like a huge spectacle, because they see WrestleMania and they see so many people that have witnessed it and they're like, should we maybe take it more seriously? So
Mhm.
that's kind of ridiculous at times.
Yeah, what Russia need to do is find themselves an American wrestler who's willing to fly out to Russia and be like the biggest heel in the history.
You know what, in
And
IWF Russia we actually have a wrestler who is not actually American, but
right.
but he's this American villain, you know.
Excellent,
But
excellent.
actually also we've had a lot of foreign American, Canadian
Hmm.
wrestlers perform in Russia with IWF
Sure.
Russia, with Northern Storm Wrestling in St. Petersburg. It's a very common practice, and even Laura Di Matteo, that is now based in UK and performs in
Hmm.
UK. She was the IWF Russia Women's Champion just quite recently.
Hmm.
So there is an international exchange happening, which is really great to see, because those people get to experience a new culture like Russia.
Hmm.
Not many wrestlers can say that they've performed in Russia, but then
Yeah.
also our local wrestlers get to interact with people from around the world, and sometimes they give like seminars or lectures and like open, training days, which is really, really great.
Yeah. The more I think about it, to be fair, I think if I don't know, another decade, I could see Russia becoming quite big in the wrestling industry, just because if you think of the whole amateur wrestling, the Olympic style wrestling from Russia's always been pretty good. It's always been something that a lot of the audience tend to watch back in the day, and they want to see their guys. So, like Japan has a certain type of fan, and they're very respectful. It's very quiet if you sit in a New Japan audience, I can assure you, and it's a completely different atmosphere. But um, much like Mexico, with lucha libre, certain type of culture there, I could see Russia having their own identity to what professional wrestling needs to be. Now, obviously, you said you was a fan of The Miz. What was your sort of quite a varied fan of most professional wrestling, or have you got a certain taste?
No, one thing before I answer that question, you
Yeah,
mentioned amateur wrestling. That's pretty
sure.
popular in Russia, but
Yeah.
it's strange to me that you mention it, because I feel like to the Russian audience, wrestling, as in professional wrestling, and amateur wrestling are like such different things. They're almost on the opposite points
Right.
of the spectrum, because
Mhm.
there's so much, like macho culture
Mhm.
ingrained in amateur wrestling in Russia, and it's like supposed to be like super like manly sport and like manly thing for men. And actually, there's a pretty famous, to my shame, I don't remember her name, but there's a pretty famous amateur wrestler. She's a girl from the Caucasus region, and she was basically almost bullied out of this sport because
Right.
it's very like dominated by this notion that it's like for men.
Okay.
And
Oh,
wrestling
man.
is so different from that for professional wrestling.
Mhm.
I keep saying wrestling because in Russian those are even like two very different words. That's why I'm just like saying
Okay.
wrestling, because I don't even like identify it as,
Yeah,
something
no,
that.
I get you. I get you.
So
And do you think? Sorry, go on.
and like for uh Russian person who is into martial arts or into amateur wrestling, like this is the exact person that would shit on professional wrestling. Like this is the
Mhm.
person that hates it for being fake. So
Right. Okay.
to me, those are very different audiences.
Do you think has there ever been a time, or would there ever be a time where an amateur wrestler would go into professional wrestling? Like, would make the transition?
Yes.
There would.
Yeah, I think so. And I think some Russian wrestlers have like a background of amateur wrestling. Like they weren't
Okay.
professional sportsmen in amateur wrestling, but they are kind of trained in it. But I feel like, again, it's something that you more commonly see in America
Mhm.
than here.
Sure. Yeah, it's a hard thing. I get what you're saying with that as well. I think like on a different level, not to that level that you've just mentioned there. I don't think they're that bad. But in the States, I remember when Brock Lesnar first got into the UFC, and there was this like, what is this guy doing here? He's fake. He shouldn't be here. Not knowing that Brock had an NCAA background and all
Yeah.
the rest of it, and obviously he took that by storm, and become one of the biggest draws they've ever had. I mean, in popularity terms anyway. So I guess it takes something like that to maybe happen. You need to
Yeah.
find that in Russia. You need to find a guy who's willing to do both and get in there. But God knows where that would end up. But going back to my other question, what kind of wrestling? What's the sort of styles that do you enjoy watching? Do you go back on a lot of the older stuff, or do you like the kind of current wrestling that we see today?
I kind of like modern wrestling better. Like I'm not the
Okay.
person to go back and watch a lot of old school stuff. Like of course I'll watch things that like I need to like understand like current events, or that I need to be like, educated on, like for a video or
Hmm.
something like that. But I am more of a modern wrestling fan,
Hmm.
because to me like the criteria by which like I judge wrestling and by which I choose what I like to watch are somewhat modern, because I value inclusion, I value worker safety, and that's not something that you'll see like 20 or 30 or 50 years ago.
Mm.
And also, in terms of wrestling and in terms of wrestlers that I prefer, I kind of like, I guess you could say, modern gimmicks. Like, I like something fun, I like something maybe even comedic. Um, and that's not something that, again, was taken seriously
Hmm.
some time ago. I'm not saying there wasn't comedy wrestling. There always was comedy wrestling, and it's
Hmm.
not something that's like recently emerged and destroyed wrestling, as some people say. Of course not. But
Yeah.
I kind of like the modern outlook on the genre better.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I guess in the last, 20, 25 years, wrestling, with the biggest company, maybe WWE, they have told us now that what you're watching is a show, as opposed to it being kind of, very much, we're not going to tell you the secret, even though we all knew they would never tell you that themselves. But now, of course, with all the documentaries that we see, they all talk about all that stuff now. And it's almost like wrestlers today are almost playing the character as opposed to being the
Yes.
character, which is, for me, is good and bad. Like, I have mixed views with it, personally, but my listeners know that anyway. But yeah, I'm a kind of hit and miss with that kind of stuff. Now, you are one of the most outspoken people out there, that you say what is on your
Wow.
mind. By all accounts, and they said it could be dangerous to have us both on at the same time, but I said no, it'd be okay. We, we'll adapt, not to fear. But in terms of your shows and the way you present your stuff, like, have you got a certain style that you stick to with your YouTube videos? Did you get in this with the intentions of being that way, or is that just your personality?
I'm not really like playing a character, or like making myself out to be someone who I'm not. Like it's even kind of like unexpected that when you even invited me, you were like, oh, like you're the person who says it like it is, like you're gonna be like so explosive, and I'm like, geez, am I? And it's also strange because my number one priority when I express my opinion on something or when I discuss a topic is to keep it in the back of my mind that people are very different and that people have different life experiences and different opinions and different outlooks on life. And my number one priority is to be accepting and to be inclusive of all of them and to not make anyone feel like they're alienated or not welcome on my channel just because of a difference in opinion. But then again, difference in opinion is one thing, but disagreeing with someone's whole existence is another thing.
Yeah.
And people like that, people who discriminate, are indeed not welcome on my channel, and I don't want them there. Mm-hmm. Even for the sake of numbers or ads or whatever, like I don't need this kind of energy in my life. And maybe that's why people think that I am, this extremely honest person, because I just try and keep my vision clean, because I just try and I just try to stand for something, because there's a saying like, when you stand for nothing you fall for everything, and that's really dangerous. Mm-hmm. So
I get yeah.
This is just me, like this is just my thoughts, my views on things, nothing too extreme.
No, I get you. To be honest with you, when I watched your videos, I didn't think you was in any way an outspoken person. I just think you're very direct. And in the UK especially, we're not used to that sometimes. I think a lot of people, they kind of like, they adapt to everybody, and they might just agree with someone just not to have the argument. But I think a debate or a different in opinion, I mean, that's what makes a show sometimes. Like, and I encourage that. I mean, if someone's not going to agree with me, that's no problem. We're just going to debate it. That's what the kind of fun of it. So I don't always want people just saying yeah all the time. I mean, just it's not going to be as fun. So I get that, but I think just our fans in the UK especially, we're not used to having just somebody say this is what I like, and that's it. Do you know what I mean? Like, we haven't got to keep saying I like this because like, this and I don't like it.
All kinds of jokes about British people, and like, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say that like that's like bad or anything. Like, I love British people. I love all kinds of people, but there's also like this joke that British people would like rather suffer than like say something. Like, for example,
I think you're right.
When you get like a wrong order at the restaurant, you'll be like complaining to your friend, but then when the waiter asks you, you're like, oh, everything's great.
That's and I feel not far-fetched, to be fair.
Yeah, and I feel like that's something that's sometimes found in Russian people too. Wow. Like, we'd rather just suffer than like actually say something. Okay. But I feel like at times it is something that's just employed to like keep universal peace, Mm-hmm. But then sometimes you just, I always say that sometimes in certain topics you need to pick a side. Like, you can't always be neutral. Sometimes you just need to say what you have to say. So
I get you. I think that's a good assumption there about the whole restaurant business. We're definitely like that. We are definitely the ones that have a moan to our friends, but are not going to put a hand up and say, what the hell is this you've just given me? This is ridiculous. We'd rather moan. Now, I mean, in terms of WWE of late, obviously they've had, or they've just started to reintroduce some crowd, but it's mainly developmental people standing around for the most part. But how has your experience been with watching those shows without a crowd, without the big arena in WWE, in terms of WrestleMania, Money in the Bank, and of course just recently NXT TakeOver did a show called In Your House. Have you found that difficult to watch it as a fan, and obviously what you do after as well? Have you found that challenging, or have you been okay with it?
I wouldn't say that it was difficult to watch, but I'd say that, yes, at first it felt kind of weird. Yeah. But I feel like at this point, I'm so used to it that seeing like shots of old shows where there was crowd is weird. Like, what do you mean there were people at wrestling shows at some point in history? It's so weird at this point. But like, I feel like both WWE and AEW, and of course WWE includes NXT in this regard, have been very innovative in the ways that they've introduced to try and keep the audience interested and try and keep them entertained. I really, really loved Money in the Bank and the way that they introduced this whole like career ladder thing, even though it might have been a little insensitive in the light of recent releases.
Yeah.
But also, like, I don't mean to say that my opinion is like the one only right thing to think here, but I feel like in regards